festivals, testes, 1, 2, 3. Okay, welcome. In my day job, I'm a college professor. In my night job, I'm still a college professor. You can ask my wife and back. That's all I seem to do anymore. I don't get to play the cool things anymore. I used to play a long time ago. That is her Lotus for those of you who are looking. So now, it's important. Everybody has to put up these sorts of slides, these disclaimers these days. And the bottom line, the only thing is, yes, I am a doctor. I've got 2 doctorate degrees, but I'm not your doctor. And so I don't want to see your rash. However, if you want to show it off, after the Q&A session, over in that part of the room. So I'm going to whip through this because this is written for a slightly, what I'll say, less informed audience. I wasn't certain how informed, but I've been watching the questions all day and the faces, and I know some of the people in the room. So I'm going to talk about a problem that I'm trying to solve, and that is all bad stuff comes in over the network, over your network traffic. And so if we're talking industrial control systems, yeah, I didn't put SCADA in the title, sorry. You don't want all that bad stuff. So now what do? We isolate it. And so we're going to look at how we got there, how we want, what do we want to do today, because the world is not like it was 30 years ago. And so the problem I'm addressing is we have a lot of really important infrastructure stuff. Things we paid literally billions of dollars for. And it's all over our cities. Everything runs on this infrastructure. And now we want to connect it to, God forbid, the corporate enterprise network. And then somebody came up with this idea, let's use the internet because the internet is free. And, okay, yeah, technically, well, okay, maybe. It comes with costs, and now we seem to be having problems. And so the question is, how do we address these problems? One of the trends that's created this problem is hyperconnectivity. Somebody decides, you got it, we can connect it, let's connect them all together, see what happens. And the internet's magical. It really can connect and can carry virtually any traffic you want. Now, if we'd invent a flag in the IP protocol that says this is an evil packet, and then make a rule that everybody had to, if you have evil packets, you flip the flag, life would be better. We don't have that rule. Hence, what happens is bad packets cause problems to our control systems, which means movies like Die Hard 4 can be made. Because can you do that stuff? Probably not as sexy as in the movies, but yes, you can seriously mess up control systems. As I was mentioning in the beginning, talking with people in the room, I give my students PLCs to play with, and about one a semester comes back with no more blinky lights. It's dead. And it's not because they connected 110 up to a 5-volt input, it's just these things don't like certain things that happen to them, and then they go brain dead. So let's look in the reality world. What do engineers want? Reliability. That's all they care about. If it worked yesterday, I want it to work today, so it'll work tomorrow. And you say, well, what about? They don't care. We're not changing anything. Patch it? Why? It's working. The business wants more integration. I come from Houston, Texas. It's the land of oil and gas. A lot of those companies are built by people that were once called wildcatters. And believe it or not, CEOs sit in their office and monitor individual drilling rigs. Why? That's what they grew up doing. And so they want to have a live feed from a drill rig as it's drilling. Really? But that's the way this stuff works. In today's technology, we can do that. Should we do that? Different question. But he's a CEO. Isolation is how we've always relied upon this. Okay? Isolation, though, unfortunately has failed. Because air gaps are not isolation. Air gaps are merely temporal gaps. It means, in other words, for a certain amount of time it's not connected, but sooner or later you're going to connect it, or information is going to come or go. And so, in today's world, where I want data coming out, I want logs, I want to take updates in, all these sorts of things, how do I isolate it? So, putting on the comp sci thinking cap, although I'm not a computer scientist, I'm a technologist, there are ways we can isolate it because we don't need to isolate it from legitimate commands, just all that other traffic. And so I always get this question when I present this commercially or ISACA, ISA meetings, things like that. Well, VPNs are great. They solve all the problems. You should just put a VPN around it. And I have to remind people that when you connect a machine via the VPN, you get everything from that machine, not just what you wanted, everything. And I always just remind people when I hear that words is, why not just let the engineer then from the outside sales company walk right up to your rig and plug their machine into your protected network segment? We couldn't do that. We have to use a VPN. Is that me? Excuse me, sorry. So, just like we have this rule of no USBs out in the plant floor, things like that, because USBs carry evil things, no VPNs either, really. We'll use VPNs, but for very selected things, because at least people in the engineering world that get this, understand that VPNs are not security devices in this respect to the machine you're adding into the VPN. Little language here, because every field has its own language, and we're leaving IT land and moving into this process control land. They use two terms, zones and conduits. A zone is just a group of elements, be it machines, operators. It's defined by a border that says this is what's in the zone, this is what's out of the zone. And typically a zone is what you would think of as one security profile. So everything inside of it's going to have the same basic security rules. So this way I can manage the security rules to everything in one group of things called a zone by enforcing it at a conduit, because the conduit is the only way you're in or out of a zone. So we do these same things in networking, we just don't label them this way. But the labeling is kind of important in the ICS space because they really do, as engineers, try not to connect everything to everything because, again, they want it to work. So the conduit's where you place your security controls. Nothing comes or goes out of a zone without going through the conduit, therefore we'll just check it there. Classic IT solution, firewall, well, let's make it modern, next generation firewall. How useful those have been in the IT world? We even have ICS firewalls. They're companies that's what they specialize in. They specialize only in firewalls that really understand these special protocols. Guess what? The same problem occurs. The problem isn't in the special protocols. The problem is in all that other traffic. And people find ways, hackers and evil actors find ways around things like firewalls. So, for high impact or high value zones, like think nuclear reactor, we don't allow these devices. Just not allowed. Let's look at why and how we want to change this. Firewalls work at the network layer because they manage your traffic. And they try to define a set of good traffic versus evil traffic, allowed versus not allowed. And so they look at traffic and say, should this go across? But then we think about problems like Heartbleed that came along. And will Heartbleed cross a firewall? And the answer is yes. There's a lot of types of traffic that'll cross firewalls because you've allowed that protocol that it's carried on. And so really, bottom line, the underlying problem is this thing called traffic. We allow way too much stuff in and out that we don't need. So, bottom line, we can go around all the tools of IT security. If somebody here thinks they've got a bulletproof IT security solution that nobody gets around, trust me, you wouldn't be sitting here right now. There'd be people carrying your money downstairs. So I started thinking about this along with some friends and looked at some solutions that are out there. They're called unidirectional gateways, and that's what we use in the nuclear space. They only allow traffic to go one direction. There's no feedback channel. And I started thinking, okay, this is how they work. And I said, well, what we really need to pass is just the information. I don't need to pass traffic. Because if you think about a database replication solution, it only passes specialized database traffic between one database server and another. It doesn't sit there and make a new packet and send the same SQL commands. It just sends, update this block to this. That's all it needs to know. It doesn't even have to know what table, what user, any of that. It just replicates the data changes. So how can we do the same thing in this place? Okay. How can we move information on Internet Protocol? There are lots of ways. We did it long before. Matter of fact, there was a talk earlier about serial buses. So we still use serial buses in this world. And so your typical system right now looks somewhat like this. You have a control system on one side, and it's got all these fancy control system terms. You know, zone, HMI, human machine interface, historian, PLC, engineering workstation, etc. Not that important to us. It's the really important stuff that I don't want anybody to touch. And then it goes across network to my business enterprise zone. And so this, I don't care how many appliances you put in the middle, it doesn't work in IT, and it allows, as I put it, network carries data plus one. Yeah, we always want that coveted plus one at a party. You don't want plus one in your systems when it's talking about information coming in. You only want what you ask for, not that extra guest. And so when I think about database replication, as I mentioned, SQL requests come into a database server, but then it just tells its backup server, its replicant, hey, this block of data on the drive changes. That's it. It doesn't have to go through all the other stuff. The primary database did all that resolution. Hence, you can't just jump in the middle of it and really make a difference because you not one that's meaningful because you don't have a clue as to what the different blocks are and how they move. So, what I want to do is I want to move state. What is state? In a control system, like let's take this room, if the room was wired with a control system, we'd have these lights. The lights would have two positions, on and off. Okay, there's AC in the room. It might be a temperature, which would be a number, or just a simple on or off. And so state is all these different parameters. And the cool part about PLCs is they're really simple in the end. They only do two things. Turn something on or turn something off. And they also measure something. They have a way of taking an analog measurement, turning it to digital, and giving you the answer. All your logic, that's magic, but you know what? Very simple devices. You'll turn the lights halfway on. Switches are on or off. So, if I want to move all the information out of my plant, do I really need to packetize it, put it in all these different protocols, and make it so it can go across the whole internet? Well, the answer is, if I want to get it to the CEO's desktop, yeah, probably I do, because that's how we move the traffic. But now, how do I scrub all the other traffic out? And I'm going to do it by putting something in the middle called the state transfer device. Two devices, one on each side. Does not have to be far apart. Matter of fact, one of the arguments I just had with one of the vendors of a unidirectional gateway is, why can't I put these both in the same box and just have two network connections, one going in, one coming out? On one side is a gateway interface. What it is, it's your standard computer interface. It can speak all the different protocols. It's fully network aware, but it's also aware because you programmed it with exactly what states you're interested in transferring. How many switches, how many measurements, all those things. And so it translates from your protocols coming in. It looks at the SCADA protocols and goes, oh, SCADA protocol. This I can get a state value out of. I can transfer a state. And the same thing on the other side is a duplicate box on the other side. Hence, the only thing that's transferring between these two boxes is the state of a given switch, a given measurement, a given coil, whatever. So what I'm trying to do now is basically block, it's going to block all other traffic. It just drops it in a bit bucket. There's no place to send it. Because the protocol between the two is very, very simple. It's just the data that needs to move. Now, if I want to actually do this, it does require a little bit of planning, but the interesting part is it doesn't require an architectural change. Because it's just a bump in the wire. However, it does require that you have a little more knowledge. Let's take a look at that. You have to define what information you want to transfer in and out. Because if you forget and leave off a crucial switch, it's not coming in or out. Okay? And so you have to go back and look and see, how am I going to architect my zones? What pieces of information need to be moved? And then I can just slop it in. So let's define our needs. What really needs to move in and out of a SCADA system or a control system? Well, I have data. That's kind of the number one thing. It's why these things exist. And they come from a source called the historian. You gather your data, you stick it in this, call it a database for lack of any other term, so the people that make the programs give them special names called historians. You're storing your data in the database. Well, I want to replicate that out. No problem. How about log data from all this stuff? You know, log files from this, that, sure, syslog, we always want that. How about coming in? Do I need to update things? Yep. How about updates to my PLCs? Yep. How about admin updates to things like my Active Directory replicant that's in the control room, DNS servers, things like that? Yep. Now, before you get too excited, those are really stripped down versions. They only replicate over the part that works in that tiny little part of the world. Because in a control system at any given time, you have to assume that like my plant just blew up and the rest of the world is zombified, but I still want to make whatever my refinery's making. And so I need my own little replicant of everything in the control room. And so the control system network that attaches to all the devices is highly redundant, highly secured, and lives in a bomb-proof room such a way that as long as the equipment's still working, it'll work. But then this is a question I always get when I'm talking about this to people in the industrial control section. Well, what about our HTTP? You know, we play World of Warcraft at night. They won't say that out loud, but you'll find it on their machines. You know, and it's like, no. You shouldn't have that on your machines. What about mail? We always like checking our mail in the middle of the night because we catch up on the stuff. No. All those other useful things, I'll give you a solution. It's a simple solution, it's cheap, and it'll solve all sorts of problems for you. So what I have to do when I operationalize this is I don't have just one interface. I end up with a bunch of interfaces. Because, for instance, for a given set of controllers, they're going to have states. And maybe the data is going out. So my historian may be one set of traffic going out. Okay? A different set of traffic going out are, say, the logs. I may need to move other files out that are specific types of files. Okay? And so, in essence, the data that goes out, I have to be able to define what it looks like so I can do a state transfer. Same thing for data coming in. I have to define those channels. So notice all the channels are unidirectional. And it looks like a bidirectional gateway, but really, it looks like bidirectional network traffic, but it really isn't. Okay? Data goes out, data doesn't come in, etc. So you have to sit down and define what all those mean, because they're programmed into both sides of the gateways. Now, remember all that stuff that's really important, like World of Warcraft in the middle of the night, checking email. Actually, believe it or not, I mean, I spend a lot of time in control rooms and the refinery sector. The number one thing they have one machine dedicated to is the weather. Go figure. Weather's kind of important to those guys. So they subscribe to a weather service. They get better weather forecasting than we do from the stuff on the TV news. They pay for it. But it's an HTTP connection. Stick a standalone network computer outside the zone of the important stuff. Therefore, if you decide to go fix your banking, or you decide to go play World of Warcraft, or you're looking at, I don't care where you go, there's no watering hole attack that's going to affect your critical stuff of your good zone. And in today's networking, how hard is it to have two machines sitting side by side on completely different networks? Really. And the other part about it is, the machines that I want to run all this special control system stuff on are usually things like XP and locked down to a very old version because the vendors are like, oh, well, we haven't validated any of these newer things. Hence, it really gives you a crappy experience with some of this other stuff. IE6 is great for some old control systems, not so much something you want to put on the web today. Hence, you isolate, you just separate the two. By the way, that engineering workstation, it sits in a separate zone. What do those cost today? A couple $100 bucks? And they remove how many headaches? You know, just one problem a year pays for that workstation. So in the end, this bump on a wire, and I'm using the same term, unidirectional gateway, that the standards use, What it does is it provides a separation of everything inside this control system zone from the outside world. It is a complete physical separation. The only traffic that it allows are predefined states that you've sat down and decided this switch gets to transmit in or out. You may not even want to move all your data out. You may decide only pieces of your data need to really go out. Hence, we stop passing traffic. Now, so what? We'll get to the so what in a minute. It actually does, and we've done some of this in the lab, and it's got some really useful, interesting effects. It's not a data diode solution. This is one thing I want to bring up. You'll hear about this a lot of times. Oh, we use data diodes. All data diodes really are unidirectional network traffic devices. Yeah, we'll let the traffic come in from these places. That's a trusted server. We'll let that one communicate in. So what's the first thing a good red teamer does? Own that trusted server. Because then it's so much easier to get in. And so data diodes don't check traffic per se. And even the ones that now they're starting to say, we'll put a next generation firewall on it. That'll solve it. You know, I'm not a buyer of this technology anymore. Because once you're past it, too many things can go wrong. So the bottom line is, I want a gateway that understands the state being transferred, not the traffic. Because I can't really look to see if that's a good packet or a bad packet. That system has failed us. Now, why is this secure? It breaks the attack surface pathway to your systems from the outside. So if you go look at all the current attacks, take the Heartbleed attack. It could clobber one of the clients and knock down one of their gateways. All your attacks can do is hit that client. And since that machine is a separate physical machine from the other side, there's not one processor running two programs. Two processors, two separate computers in essence built in there. Can't cross. You can break the outside Raspberry Pi, but the inside one doesn't care. Because it just says, oh, I lost state. No more states coming in. So you take Heartbleed, we can't cross. The latest TLS hack, same problem. Buffer overflows. I don't care. Buffer overflow it to death. It doesn't matter. You're not going anywhere when you hurt that machine. Ooh, let's get really exciting. Erase condition. Doesn't matter. Injections, droppers, drop something on the box so you can connect and do something evil to that Raspberry Pi. And I built one of these using Raspberry Pis, for instance. Guess what? It doesn't matter. It only affects the outside piece. Can't get to the other side. And why do we want to do this? Talk to the engineers. Reliability, reliability, reliability. We're not letting anything in. Anything that wants to come in has to be previously defined across the states. Okay? And the reason being is any failure that comes across reduces their reliability and causes them problems. Now, I've had numerous people say, my ICS systems aren't really targets. You know, there are other things that are targets. And my answer to that is, guess what? Just consider this the future then. You know, you haven't figured it out yet because there are two classes of people running systems, those that know they've been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked. So we'll put you in that second group for right now. So consider for the future when you know you've already been hacked. These systems are targets. Sometimes by malicious actors, sometimes by accidental actors. Call it what you want, attribute what you want. We're seeing the traffic all the time when you go inside and look at the different systems. Let's do a little science because I have to lecture. I'm a college professor. Why does this improve your security? It reduces your attack surface. Okay? It reduces the system control surface. I'm not trying to control all these other pieces of traffic that I don't need. Okay? Why? Because attacks are carried by the traffic. The data is carried by traffic. Therefore, I get a problem if I want the data but not the other traffic. So what did I do? I separated those two. State can carry an attack, but it's much, much harder to do. Matter of fact, by and large, most of these systems don't allow outside commands in. They only pull data out for a variety of, call it simplistic technical reasons. But the guy sitting in the control room has to have the ability to control the system. Now, science, not a law. Well, actually, there is a scientific law that works on this, and it's called the law of requisite variety, and it's violated by every major security vendor all the time. And this is a long-standing, figured out back in the 60s, from systems engineering that says a system under control has a regulator that controls how it works. And if that regulator is going to control it, that regulator's complexity has to be at least as complex as the states that are being controlled. So, simply put, if I want to put a box on the edge of my network that can control, that can tell me good or bad for everything coming in, understands everything I could ever want inside my network, the complexity of that box is the same complexity as my network. Hence, the idea that I can go buy a box that can screen the whole internet for me, the complexity has to be of the internet. Yeah, it's not really an infinite number of states, but it's pretty close. It's just not controllable in that form. What did I just do in my system, though? I took all that stuff and threw it away. My system is now defined by a very limited number of control states coming in and going out. My control space is much smaller, hence my ability to control it goes way up. So for instance, we always talk about doing things simple. This is as simple as it gets because the traffic in the sensitive area, by definition, will be clean because it'll be traffic generated between these devices without regard to the outside world. So technically, everything's going to work the same way it always worked on the inside. It's just traffic gapped from the outside. So let's look at what happens with an IDS. We just had a previous session here about IDSs, things like that. Think how really cool your IDS would be if suddenly it says, oh, look, HTTP traffic, HTTPS traffic, alert. Any non-allowed traffic, alert. Why? It can't be a false alarm. That traffic doesn't belong on the inside. There's no mechanism to get it there unless somebody cross-connects a network. See an address that's new, by definition, has to be wrong because we don't allow traffic from outside. This is similar to where I live out in the country. If you don't belong in my neighborhood, you get stopped. They know who lives out in the country. Local sheriff is really good about it. Boy, you're not from around here. It works. The problem is, try the same thing on the edge. I work at a university. You can imagine what the network traffic looks like coming in and out of a university. All those students. So where does this belong? If I was a salesman representing a company, I'd tell you everywhere. Put it everywhere. But I used to be an IT guy, and I'm going to tell you this is going to be a pain in the butt to put in some places and doesn't work at all in others. But if I have a high-value, high-risk system, this will allow me to isolate it. If I have XP machines that I am dependent upon and I can't move them because of the vendor, you put this around them and only allow in or out what needs to go to those machines, guess what happens? People can't exploit your XP machine because they can't get to it. But yet you can still get what you need in and out, the states. So it's not really limited to ICS. What if Target had actually isolated their point of sale system from all the rest of their network? You know, they're wondering about that question right now. Will this work for Target? Probably not, for a variety of other reasons. We're not to that level of sophistication yet. Could it? Should work great for a point-of-sale system. I mean, how much information do they really need to be transferring in or out of all those nice little boxes? There are vendors out there in this space. They build unidirectional gateways for nuclear power plants and other places. But again, I'm not sitting here saying, hey, let's go to these vendors, buy a tool or buy a product, put it in our system, it solves the problem. No, I'm saying it's time to start thinking differently about your traffic and saying, do I need to allow traffic through this area? Do I need to allow traffic into this neighborhood? And I need to start thinking about how do I design these systems, putting security in mind of what needs to come or go, because then the system will be more reliable. And I left time for questions.
How do you envision this working for all of the additional data? So, for example, reporting that the CEOs and so forth want directly out of the data, whether it's target or another business process, chemical process, or otherwise. And the second part of that question would be, what about the vendor interconnections, the company, for example, suppliers in target, for example, where they may want to pass that directly back to their vendors and say, we need to order 1,000 of which way.
Okay, Target's a good example because their point of sale system can be really considered very similar to any modern control system. I have registers, they're running some sort of operating system, it's probably a form of Windows PE. They've got an app they bought from XYZ Corp that, you know, scans, gets the prices, goes against the database. Well, hey, guess what? These things work the same way. That thing called a historian is a database. It's a local database of all things that have been happening in my control system. And so in there can be my prices, in there can be everything loaded that makes my point of sale work. And so I now have, I'm thinking of this like ATMs because I'm formerly used to work for a financial services firm. And believe it or not, there's still a lot of ATMs running OS 2. Why? Because they worked yesterday, they're paid for, and they actually are on an isolated network for other reasons because it's too expensive to move their network. But so all the things you want to move in or out really become very, very small subset. There really is data that comes in and goes out, sales data, things like that. But that's replicating of a database server, which is actually pretty easy to do in this model. It's actually probably the easiest part of it. The harder part is actually, so I need to update my point of sale terminals with the new update. I have to whitelist things in, whitelist things out. And that takes a little bit of planning on exactly what data crosses. But literally all you have to do is decide, here's the update, and you walk to the, you have to manually go across the air gap to the inside and program, hey, this program's coming across and here is its signature. Hence it allows that piece of data in and it matches a hash. The hash is what controls what goes across the state. So you can move programs in, things like that. The problem is thinking of these things as general purpose computers and other things, and you want to remove all that thinking and make it an isolated environment. And so when you look at it, it's actually a lot simpler than a lot of people believe on making those things run. Number one rule, if you're a small business, put out by ABA probably 3 or 4 years ago, if you're a small business and you do your electronic banking, use a separate machine dedicated for electronic banking that you don't use for anything else. Why? It's necessary. Because if you or I go to our bank and we're hacked, what does the bank do? Well, we're insured. We're covered. If you're a small business, they say we're sorry for your loss. All those nice insurance things that we have for credit cards, things like that, do not apply to businesses. Okay? So, yes, small business get hit all the time. They went to the isolation route years ago in banking. But you can have stuff leave the inside of these networks. The problem with a target hit is the malware sat where? On the inside. Can't get in under these situations. That's the basic premise here. Whitelisting becomes very easy under these circumstances. You can whitelist every box in here completely and easily. because you know exactly the only things they're supposed to be running. Okay. I can answer that real easily by looking at first, all your what we'll call control system protocols are very easy when you start looking at them. Look at them in Wireshark. They're little binary strings, and it's like the device code, the switch code, the value. And so hence, you can pre-compute all those and say these are the only things that go across. That one's easy. Moving things like data out of a database server, again, because of the way database replication works, that's pretty easy. Last one, or two, but last one, the one I thought was going to be toughest, but actually turned out to be pretty easy, bringing updates to things in. That requires a sneaker net solution. You have to have another channel to tell the other side, this is the legal hash coming in. And it cannot come on channel, because that would allow a path for someone to break it. Okay? So if you have another method, so in other words, Stuxnet was successful because of humans. Okay, it passed 2 air gaps because of humans. So you can still beat this with the air gap part. With, a bad operator can bring in and say, yes, put in this piece of malware because here's a signature. And it would go across then, legally. The hard one are log files. Not really crack that nut yet because log files are different every time. And so you're letting information come out that you have no, I can't define its state really. So that one is one we're still trying to figure out a convenient way other than just allowing alpha text out. There is no protocol layering in the middle per se. Ultimately, if you ever put this into production, you'd probably use 2 different FPGAs, and you'd have a series of 64 connections across for a 64-bit, and you'd have a state model on each side, send it across. If it matches a state model, you accept it. If it doesn't, you reject it. Very similar to how actually the incoming part of a Cisco router or switch works. It just brings it into a long register and then processes it all at once. It doesn't read it into a computer memory piece by piece by piece by piece and then build it. I mean, it literally has a little register in there when it brings in the bytes, so it can just... Right, you don't need it. All those stacks, yes, all those stacks exist for the convenience of being able to pass anything to anywhere. And that's a good thing. Works great. Don't need that. Yes. Yep. No. This is not near ready to go prime time. Exactly. I mean, if you want to put this into the real world, you're going to have a real company that has real backing, that somebody's going to say, I'm going to trust that company to be around for umpteen years. But I'm not trying to sell the product. I'm trying to sell the idea of We get enamored with traffic. We don't need to be enamored with traffic. We need to be enamored with communicating only what we need to communicate. And that's it.
Real quick, where in Houston do you have a neighborhood smaller than Sheriff?
Harris County. Harris County is a huge county. However, each little place, the local deputies drive around our neighborhoods, pay attention to the kids. They know who's supposed to be there, who isn't. I was driving to work one day, and there was a guy that was slumped in his car, didn't belong in our neighborhood. And I took one look, went around the corner, called, and said, hey, you need to come look at this guy. Went to the gas station, turned around, came back home because I didn't, this guy didn't belong in our neighborhood. So I'm in the house a couple minutes, and the door knocks. A guy in dreadlocks, his beat-up beaters out front of my driveway, and he's standing there, and there's a U.S. Marshal badge right here. It's like, can I help you? And he's, yeah, can we talk? And I said, you got creds? Sticks the creds in through the door. So I open the door, and he says, so, you noticed me, huh? What do you mean? He says, sheriff called. You're the only one in the neighborhood. Only person I saw all day. You called me out, didn't you? I said, do you belong here? And he goes, no. But neither does this guy. Have you seen him? And I couldn't help him, but we get response. You can ask my wife and back, about 2 minutes. Yeah. So, yeah, there's good news to live in a county. Alrighty, and 6 o'clock show's up next.